I'm Director of Customer Competitive Intelligence at CONDE NAST. And one of the things I want to walk through today is how we're using our insights, being very data-driven, to create more impactful premium branded content. So just a little bit about who we are. CONDE NAST, we have a lot of brands under our belt, whether it's ranging from Vogue, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, all the way to GQ, Teen Vogue, Pitchfork. So many different brands out there, so many different brand voices. And among all of them, one of the key goals for each one of these brands is really bring about culturally relevant experiences. And the interesting thing on that side, we have great editors, a lot of great gut decisions coming out there and writing great content that our advertisers and our consumers love. But one of the things that we see when we work with our advertisers is that they want to work with us in a way to create more unexpected and memorable experiences with our brands. Now, that's the interesting dynamic that on one end, working with very creative teams, a lot of our editors who are bringing their cultural foresight to things and doing a lot of things based on their gut decisions. But on the other side, we're working with advertisers saying, yeah, but it still has to align with our brand. And we have to make sure that it's going to really work and we're going to see a really good ROI. So what we do with our research team when we get in these scenarios is start to really take a deep dive and look at our insights to help drive some of the creative process around branded content. And that's something we've been doing for the past 2 or 3 years now and really starting to hone in on this process so we can make sure that everything is relevant for both parties involved. So let's take a quick look at our approach. It really is about data-driven content. And I know this is something, I'm sure you've all been in client meetings, everyone says cliche at this point, data-driven insights, always using data, and then sometimes you end of the day, like, what did we really use? Was it just a spreadsheet that showed a top 10 ranker? Did we really tie data together? Did we really analyze everything to understand people's experiences and be very thoughtful with the data? And that's one of the goals that we've been doing at CONDE NAST to move away from that and not just throw out tons of data at our clients and say, here's a million things, you asked for a lot of stuff, figure out what you're going to do with it. But really hone back and say, hey, let's get the most relevant sources of data. Let's start to tie it all together. Let's really answer these questions, because when we want to do things that are more unexpected, more memorable, but also align with everyone's strategies, that's the type of stuff that we need to do. There's no one-stop shop solution report that answers everyone's questions. If there was, I would start my own company and be a billionaire, hopefully. But let's take a look back at how we do this. So one, let's look through our data sources. First, we do a digital landscape content analysis with a tool called QUID. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go further in the process. And then we have a lot of inputs from our own CONDE NAST specific data. One from our internal targeting audience content insights. So we're able to see specific targeting audience segments that we can run campaigns on. So whether it's something like auto intenders to millennial moms to foodies to people who like to go out and party on the weekends. We have all this data and we're able to tie it back into our own metrics against our sites to see what content that they're consuming. We also have our own CONDE NAST custom panels. So through the years, we have millions of subscribers from all our magazines, from all our monthly, weekly newsletters, people who engage with our brands at live activations, such as the Teen Vogue Summit, Vanity Fair Summit, Pitchfork Music Festival, who volunteer to be part of our custom panels. We have all these guys in the system, so we're able to tap into them to understand some of those specific questions and nuances that you might not necessarily get out of pure metrics, or you might not necessarily get out of a third-party tool. And oftentimes, those layer in additional nuances to questions so we can understand and dig a little bit deeper about certain things that we are seeing from the key metrics. And then finally, we have our own CONDE NAST Brand Preference Index Survey. This is an annual survey that we run every year across our entire, it's basically customer panel base. And what's great about this, one of our custom panels, but then also with the survey, our people in our panels love to talk about themselves. So it's great, keep them busy, but we have tons of data out there, especially as we work closer and closer with our advertisers, where we're starting to get more sophisticated questions from them about how they're using their brands, how they're talking about and sharing their brands. These are a lot of things that you don't necessarily get out of pure metrics, where we're able to now ask this, tap into those questions on a yearly basis, see how they're trending, to see how we could continue using this to make better decisions in premium content. So take a deeper look into the data-driven process. The first thing that we do is we map out the digital content landscape. And again, this is where we take a step back and not just looking at Conde Nast, we're looking at all sites online that are producing media, producing content. And we work with this tool called Quid, where we're able to program different types of queries that are based on maybe the themes of a campaign, the strategies around a client, the strategies of our own brands. And through this query and with Quid, Quid is able to use its own machine learning and artificial intelligence to really read and kind of scrape through all the articles online to see all the text, see all the words, pour through all that, the metadata, the subjects of all the articles, to start to form a cluster analysis around key topics and key areas. And oftentimes, this is the starting point when we're working with our creative team in terms of just what are thought starters. I know we have really great creative teams, but sometimes you just need one or two ideas to help pique an interest, pique an idea, and where they can move forward. And this helps us start that process by using this tool. And then once we start working closer with our creative teams and our advertisers, we can start to identify the different content opportunities that we see from this initial analysis. So really starting at just the high level and understand what are those white space opportunities that we want to hone in on. And then as we go through the process, we start to drive down more and more closer and more detailed into our own internal insights. And here, this is where we tap into our internal target audiences to see what are they specifically most likely to engage with on our network. We could start looking at a high level, start going by brand, start going in subtopics within each of the higher level topics, what they're consuming on by day, morning, midday, in the evening. And from there, that's where we start to kind of get some additional information to really start to tie together what are the key topics that we want to form around the branded content that we know is going to excel on our network. So I'll take you through a case study, and in this example, what we were doing, we were working with an auto client, a truck client, and really we want to understand what's the best way to present their brand and their branded content across our network, not just on our male-focused brands, across any of our brands, that one, aligns with some of their key themes and strategies for the year, but then also aligns with content that we're seeing is overperforming for the auto intender audience across our network. And what's interesting in this example is that for auto, that is what we would consider a non-endemic type of client for us. And I say non-endemic in the way that we don't necessarily have brands that are auto-focused only brands. A lot of our brands are more around entertainment, fashion, beauty, travel, and food. So when we have a client that's in a category that's not in one of those, it's finding the right way to intersect their brand in content that doesn't feel like it's standing out in the wrong way, that feels like it's naturally in the right environment, but doesn't feel like it's forced on either end. And that's one of the key goals of why we're doing this type of insight, so we can make sure that anytime we do branded content, it doesn't feel like it's standing out. Because what we know more and more every day, and especially as we look into some of our younger audiences, they understand the advertising game. They understand how it pays for free content. They understand that they welcome that, but also if you're going to do it in a way that's not obnoxious. And that's where we want to do this type of analysis to make sure that we're meeting everyone's goals and not really going against any individual brand, whether it's our own brands within Conde Nast or within our advertisers' brands, their own messaging strategies and visions. So first, let's take a look at understanding the overarching digital content landscape. So this is what our first pass of when we work with the tool Quid. And what we did with this example is we wrote a query around autos and trucks, how people are writing content online amongst digital lifestyle-focused sites. So this is an area where we weren't looking at sites like cars.com or KBB, anything like that. We were looking at more other sites that are similar to ours, other sites that might be more entertainment type of sites, to understand how people are writing this content. And through Quid, we're able to do this cluster analysis to see over the last few months, these are the top key areas of how people are writing about this content. So you can look at the mass, it kind of looks like a web, almost kind of like a narrow brain map. But what we're seeing now, and if you could see closely, there are individual circles there. Those are individual nodes. Each one of those are an individual piece of content. And we start to cluster this area to see what are the top areas. How, when people write about cars and auto and trucks and lifestyle sites online, what are the key topic areas that they start to form around? So in this example, I know there's a lot of different clusters in here, but for instance, the top 3 that we're seeing were around food trucks, festivals and activities, off-roading and nature. And often what we do, this is the beginning of the process, because we're able to slice and dice this data in so many different ways. So for instance, if we're interested in food trucks, then we could start to dive into just that cluster and see, okay, within food trucks, what are the top 10 subtopics within that? So we could start to see, okay, maybe this is food trucks and festivals. Maybe this is food trucks and starting your own business. There's so many different ways that we could start to dive into this data, or even slice and dice and say, how does this look when we look at CONDE NAST sites by itself? Or how does it look like when we look at non-CONDE NAST sites? Or how do we focus on different key areas? And this part of the analysis is really honing in to start off just on a broad scope of where do we even start in this process. So what we do next is we look at the data a couple different ways. That was just one way of looking at it, just on an initial step. But then there's so many different types of visual charts that we look at just to understand kind of key differences in the data. This is an important one that we often hone in on a lot, where we look at this 2x2 matrix chart, where we look at social engagement versus content published. And in this example, on the x-axis is published count. So on the left side, less content is actually published for those topics, going all the way to the right, where we're seeing a lot more content published. And on the y-axis, we're looking at social engagement, bottom low to high. And social engagement we use as a proxy to understand what is going to be engaging for the consumer. If they're sharing this content, most likely find it valuable enough that they want to share with their own personal network. So what we typically do next is start to go through this with our clients to understand what are key opportunities and strategies that they may want to align with each one of these. And we break it out in a quadrant to kind of align in some key overarching areas that we think about. So we look at, for instance, this top right quadrant. And in this area, this is content that is published a lot online to the point that it's actually a little bit saturated because a lot of people are publishing this content. But despite all that content being published online, we are seeing there's high engagement. So in a way, it's almost kind of an easy sell to say, we could do something in this area because we know, one, a lot of other people are doing it, but also we know a lot of people are engaging with it and sharing with their friends and family socially. So we see areas such as pets and trucks, food and trucks, animal search and rescue, areas that this is a lot of that content being produced online, but people are actually sharing it. But oftentimes when we work with our advertisers, they want to understand, well, we want to stand out. We want to do something that no one else is doing. What is that white space? That part's cool, and that's almost an easy sell. But let's do something different. And that's an ask that we're getting more and more from our clients, where we'll now start to take a look in this upper left-hand quadrant, where in this area, there's not as much content being produced online. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means not too many people are doing it. But when people are producing this content, consumers and readers are engaging with it a lot. And so oftentimes, this is the area that a lot of our advertisers are excited about, because then they could say, oh, we're doing something that is going to stand out a little bit more online. We're doing something that is not going to be in the kind of saturated mess of this articles being produced day to day, and that they could say, we brought something to the table that is different and will help us stand out against other sites, other advertisers. So this is an interesting area that oftentimes we're able to now see some of these topics and then start to dive in even deeper to understand what are subtopics within this that might be even more interesting. We also take a look at this bottom left-hand quadrant, where this is an interesting quadrant. We often say these are a lot of our emerging type of trends, emerging type of topics. It's not too many, it's in the lower bottom left-hand side, but not too much content published around these topics. And the social engagement's pretty low to average. And oftentimes, what's interesting, we started doing this exercise a little bit over a year ago, and we started trending some of the topics we were seeing in these exercises over the course of the year, over months. And what we were seeing is a lot of these topics started to move into the upper 2 quadrants as you go 6 months on, to the point where we start to look at this and say, hey, maybe these are the topics that are about to blow up into bigger trends. So when we work with some of our advertisers, we start to dive into these a little bit more, because oftentimes, by the time when we start talking to an advertiser to when a campaign's launching, that might take a few months going through that process. So a lot of times they start to look into this key area too to see what are opportunities to kind of get ahead of the game and do something, or be the person who's tied to content or a topic that's about to blow up online. So this is an interesting area where oftentimes when we work with our clients and our creative teams, this turns into a whole working session in itself, because it's a deeper dive into what are other cooler things that we could do in this key area. And then finally, the bottom right quadrant. This is an area, there's a lot of content that's produced, but not too much sharing. And this is typically, we really avoid this area. It's just a lot of saturated content and probably not enough to really engage with consumers. So oftentimes this is not an area that we really ever focus on. A lot of times what ends up falling into this area is around just earning statements. If you talk about CPG, we might see some stuff about recalls. And a lot of times we see topics in that area. So fortunately, naturally, it kind of falls out of the conversation. But it's interesting, even as we start to plot the different types of content across in this map, we start to have deeper conversations and being a partner with our advertisers as we go through the process. So once we start with that initial taking a step back and seeing what is happening in the landscape and getting kind of a short list of key areas and topics that we want to hone in on, which might range from one of the 3 main quadrants that we were talking about, then we take a deeper look in what exactly is our target audience doing on Condé Nast sites. So here, this is where we tap into more of our internal content insights. And for instance, we're looking at auto intenders. What's their most engaging auto-specific content? And we look at it a couple of different ways. Kept it high level for this purpose, for today's purposes. But for instance, for auto, we'll start off just looking at whenever we do actually write about auto content within our network, what are the key topics and areas that they're most likely to over-index on against the average Condé Nast consumer in the network? So here we see topics around autonomous vehicles, electric cars, ranging all the way down to car design, vintage cars. And we could go down to a list of 20 or 30 different types of topics and subtopics to see really where to hone in on. And this starts to give us an idea of, okay, when we're talking about cars in the branded content, we want to make sure we have some of these themes, because we're seeing this is what's resonating the most. But one of the interesting things oftentimes when we're working with our non-endemic clients is what's the content that is not specific to their category that their key audience is really engaging with. So for instance here, now we're looking at auto intenders, any type of topic on Condé Nast. It doesn't have to be auto specific. And we're seeing that they're engaging the most right now on politics, fashion, travel, entertainment, celebrity, humor, and technology. This is the kind of top level where we're seeing that they're most likely to engage with. And here, this now starts the conversation of, okay, if we're doing something with auto and we want to align in more of a lifestyle space, do we start to do things around auto and politics? Is there a way to do something cool with auto and fashion? This is an interesting way to even start the conversation and work with our creative teams to start to think through things that might tie together, but we also know through our data is relevant to these target audiences. But we take it a step further and we start to see what are they consuming on, what content are they consuming throughout the course of the day. So we're able to see in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, for instance, in this example, what our auto intenders are most likely to over-index with consuming. So in the morning, we start seeing a lot more fitness, food, science, and fashion content. As we go through the course of the day, you start seeing more content where it's taking a little bit more time to get through, a little bit more time to engage. We start seeing more news and politics around during the day. In the evening, we're starting to see a little bit more of the tech and travel and business-related content within our sites. And what's interesting, even when we look at this content, start looking at key metrics in terms of time spent and engagement, these are often the types of articles that are requiring a lot more time to read through. We're often seeing these are the longer form articles within our network. So now we're starting to see, okay, if we're doing branded content and we want to be a longer term play, now, maybe it's something we want that we know our audiences are going to focus on more in the evening when they're in that zone of sitting back and taking their time. And this is an area that we often tap into our custom panels to ask some more additional questions. So all of this so far has been based on metrics, but now we could tap into our internal panels and find that auto intender segment and start to send them ad hoc questions to say, hey, well, one, we could ask them what content most likely to engage with in the evening, but now we could ask the but whys. And oftentimes with the metrics, those don't just answer the but whys. And we start to see that some of the whys are now at lunch in the morning, it's more about everyone's getting ready for work, probably getting their kids ready for school or they're in school themselves. Everyone's just in the zone of reading one of those quick hit articles. So those articles might just be about thinking about fitness. Maybe they went to the gym in the morning. Things are a little more faster paced that they could kind of get through. But in the afternoon, what we're hearing more and more about is that now they're probably at work, most likely sitting at their desk. They have their phone with them, but they also have a laptop or a desktop with them. So now they have two screens, and they have a little bit more time to start digging into some of the bigger articles that take more time within our network. And then what we started hearing is that in the evening, this is kind of that moment where they're home. Now they have maybe the tablet, the phone, the laptop in front of them, probably all three, the way everyone is these days, but really starting to kind of take their time. And they set aside the articles they knew they were planning to save in the evening. And this is where we start to see that really, really full engagement, because now they're in that zone of leaning back and relaxing and now engaging in that content on our networks. And so this is an interesting way to, even as we start to look at different key topics, to help our teams, our creative teams, start to think through what are going to be more the video plays that people need more time to sit through versus what are more maybe the short-term, smaller branded content sponsored type of articles that people can read quickly in the morning. So this also is another area as we could start to help pull together that short list of how our creative teams and the editorial teams start to package this together for our clients. And then, just to go a little bit deeper, we could start to go deeper into some of the subtopics within the network, looking at, beyond just looking at fashion, humor, politics, top level, we could start to see what are the key themes that people most likely engage with. So with auto intenders, looking at art and design, personal stories, that's what they seem to be resonating with. Beauty tips, golf courses, athletes, behind the scenes. We're starting to see some themes now behind the overarching segments of politics and technology. So if we're doing something around autos, maybe start to think about how do we do something with politics or in technology and autos, but a behind the scenes look? And how do we tie that into an article or a video that we know someone's going to more likely engage with at nighttime? And this is how we start to work together through all the different insights that we're seeing, move beyond just going and providing just a ranker, but start to tie things together. And when we have additional questions that might not be answered by any of the metrics, that's where we're able to tap into our custom panels and start to get those additional insights that help layer in or ask those questions, but why? Or why are they really doing this? Or is this just a one-time thing that they say, or is this something that they do on a frequent basis? So we know that we have as much data up front as possible that when we're working with our creative teams and the editorial teams, that they could start use those insights as the initial thought starters and allow their creative juices to layer on top of that and really go full force with this. So next, we take a look at, well, what is now that sweet spot? So that's a lot of data, and oftentimes when we're working with our clients, we'll work with them throughout the process in working sessions to understand the different segments, but we won't necessarily give them all this data at once. So what's the final result when we finally hone in that final branded content sweet spot that we decided on as a client? And really what we're doing is trying to find the mix of both the macro content landscape insights that we pulled together when we did our quit analysis, but then also our CONDE NAST content insights when we look specifically at a target market. So in this example, we wanted to hone in on disaster relief, the first responders, starting to fashion and transportation, and festivals and activities, just looking at the overarching macro landscape and seeing what are cool opportunities that the client was interested in that area. Then we took a look at the Conde Nast content, and we really want to hone in on the politics, the technology, art and design, personal stories, and behind the scenes. But really, what we want to do is find what's that right intersection of all those varying, the two different types of data sets to find really that sweet spot. In this example, we wanted to stay with disaster relief, first responders, politics, but have that personal stories bent, that behind the scenes bent on it, because we knew that was content that the auto intenders within our network are most likely to engage with than the average consumer. And the next step is, when we have this data set, this is where we work closely with our creative team and an editorial team to bring in their cultural foresight of all the articles and all the editorial that they do for our brands, and our creative team to really figure out what are the key tactics around this area. So for instance, in this example, they use those insights as a starting point of their own process. And now for their process, they came through and provided some additional details of some ideas and tactics that they were thinking about. So for instance, in this example, talk about branded content that tells a story of one man who earned his means through hard work and tough beginnings. Story will capture an inside look at how this person succeeds while drive the client's truck through video and photography. So really starting to tell a little bit more around the behind the scenes story about people. Documentary that tells the story of one group of individuals who inspired a target audience with their work and have an extraordinary story to tell. This is the area that we're going to take a look at some first responders, some EMT, firemen in that trade, to tell that story, because we're seeing that was a key topic that was resonating online in general for people, but now we could layer in the behind the scenes footage, the story behind it, tell a little bit more of the political story around that, and then also have an editorial series that embarks on a journey across American cities to find the tribes of people who are hoping to bring a new life to the city through meaningful work and progress. And this is a key area that we wanted to hone in on a little bit more of the politics, the political side of things, but again, tell the personal stories and the behind the scenes behind this process for our consumers. And we know from the data and insights for this audience, they're more likely to over-engage with this, but also we know a lot of these key topics are taking a look at just kind of the overarching macro landscape outside of Conde Nast are areas that are white space opportunity that aren't necessarily as saturated online, but we know is engaging for consumers. So that's one example of how we did it for an auto client. And we love to do this type of stuff, especially for our non-endemic clients, where it's an opportunity to find ways to naturally align with our content. But now we wanted to understand, what are the results of doing this? We've been doing this for about 2 years now, really kind of getting this process and getting everyone on the table to use data and insights and to really take a step back and be thoughtful of how we're using this data for this entire process. So the next thing that we did was, last year in the summertime, we did a neuroscience branded content exploration study. And here we partnered with NeuroInsight to uncover best practices for branded content by measuring responses in areas of the brain that focus on, that represent focus, emotion, and memory. And we did it, we monitored brain activity of 200 participants in a neuroscience lab in New York City. I wish I actually included a picture. There's a picture participant with just wires connected to the brain. It looks really, really cool. Didn't hurt them, probably just maybe messed up their hair, but it's really cool that we're able to kind of understand behind the scenes how their brain waves were interacting with the branded content that we're making based on this type of process that we've been doing the past 2 years. And the respondents, they saw 4 different scenarios. One, YouTube standard pre-roll, YouTube Conde Nast custom content, Facebook custom content delivered by Conde Nast, and then also Facebook custom content delivered by the brands. And their ads were inserted into their feeds across 12 categories. So auto was one, you think of travel, CPG, business, finance, tech, beauty. We looked at all the different scenarios because we've been doing this process across all our clients and categories. So we want to see how it's really working. So we were seeing some great results. One, we're seeing that Conde Nast custom content is having a higher impact of memory encoding. So memory encoding is the moment when you start to form a memory. And for all advertisers, that's an important thing. They want you to remember their ads. So in this exercise, across all the different categories we're looking at, we're seeing an average of 110% increase than the NeuroInsights benchmark, and a 60% lift higher than Condé Nast pre-roll. So cool, our pre-roll is great, but the branded content, which is the area that a lot of our advertisers want to work with us on, that's the area that we're seeing great results than just the average pre-roll on our end. We're seeing higher focus and passion with Condé Nast custom content than their own personal Facebook feeds. So a 17% lift in higher memory encoding than their personal feeds. And that's great because we have our audiences across so many different types of forms of media. You know, we think of print, then we have digital, but within digital, it might be on our O&O sites, it might be through Facebook, through YouTube. So when they're engaging with our brands on our non-O&O sites, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job, that it's standing out, because there's so much going on their Facebook feeds in the course of the day. And here we're seeing that 70% increase. And then a 14% lift in higher emotional intensity. This is, I think this part is really cool on our end, because we have so many brands that really value the premium content that they're doing. And we have creative teams that are doing so much to really bring about emotions when people are engaging with the content. We have our editorial teams that are really using a lot of their gut decisions and cultural foresight to bring together, elicit these emotions from people. So I think this was a really great one on my end, because it's an opportunity to say, hey, I'm not just being the data guy and say, do X, Y, and Z, but as we work together, we're able to be smarter with our data and still allow our creative and editorial teams to bring in all their creative juices and aspects that they're going to bring to the table and their cultural foresight on top of the insights they're seeing, and still continue to bring about these emotions of how people are engaging with their content. And then we also saw that long-form content is performing better on Condé Nast. So a 27% lift higher than the advertiser's brand's own site. And this is an interesting area. This is when we looked at the time of day usage across the different topics. That's when we started to tap into our custom panels to understand the different times of day and why people are engaging with different types of content, morning, noon, and night. So we can start to focus on the areas where they're saying, well, this is the area that I really want to focus on. These are the types of articles that I save for when I'm at home, so that I have time to fully engage with it, my full attention, versus when I'm just rushing to get to work or in between a work meeting and have 2 minutes to read an article. So that's another area where we wanted to make sure that we're tying together the right types of content for the different audiences to make sure we're catching them in that right zone, to make sure that they're engaging with our longer form content, our branded content videos that we know we have a lot to show, and we want to make sure that they're not just short clips. And then finally, this is an interesting one where, go back to the auto. I did an auto case study for this example, but we had great results when we're just looking at our overarching auto campaigns through this study. And one of the interesting things here is about how we help to bring that luxury perception to a lot of our non-endemic clients. And this is a key area that we work with a lot of clients that want to be around sometimes the fashion and beauty content, but they have nothing to do with fashion and beauty. But there's also kind of a brand halo effect of kind of being combined together. And auto's a perfect example of doing that, where we're seeing a 37% lift in emotional intensity, 18% lift in memory encoding, and then a 6% lift in engagement. And I think the emotional intensity here is a perfect example of kind of taking something that oftentimes when we work with some clients, and they might consider their brands maybe more of the quote unquote non-sexy brands that they might want to align with a Vogue or a GQ or more of those sexy brands. Here's an opportunity where we're allowed to take the best of both worlds and make sure that we're using the data so it still aligns with our clients' brand and messaging strategy, but also still aligns with our own personal brands, their messaging, their strategy for Condé Nast overall, individually by sites, so that we find that perfect connection so it all is natural and when we combine everything together. So this is something that we're continuing to do more of. I think what's interesting on this end is that even working in identifying the thought starters in the very beginning of the process has been a great opportunity for us to really partner with our clients and have them, bring them along for the ride as we're going through this entire process so they could chime in. So when we start doing these insights, that we could answer the questions but diving in deeper to things that might become top of mind or something they never thought about in the beginning. And it's really been a great process to be really consultative with our clients and not just give them data after the fact, but show them how we're working with them so that we're all in this together making the most educated decision as we move forward with branded content. And that's it. Any questions? Wow,